Listen up.
Welcome to the PowerShell Podcast, the podcast for PowerShell and the PowerShell community. And now, here's your host, Andrew Plaw.
Welcome to another episode of the PowerShell Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Plaw, at Andrew Plaw Tech on all socials. Connect with me there. And we have a very exciting episode in store for us today. We're going to be rejoined by my longtime friend, mentor, PowerShell aficionado. We'll get to him in just a minute. That is Fred, none other than Fred, the Fred. You know him, you love him. But first, I want to tell you about a cool little event we have going on every single Wednesday, pretty much, in 2025, and that's PowerShell Wednesday. That is at 2 p.m. Eastern. We meet up for about 30 minutes and have, similar to a user group, a little bit less formal, and that's something you can look forward to every single Wednesday. And in fact, our guest, we might tease it here in a minute, he'll be joining one tomorrow, which is actually in the past by the time you're hearing this. But I tell you what, it was amazing. Thank you, Fred, for joining me. And you can check that out on the PDQ Discord, discord.gg/PDQ. But let me bring on our guest, my friend, Fred.
Hi, Andrew. How's it going?
What's up, man? You're a PFE, or what do they call it? Customer engineer for Microsoft?
A cloud solution architect, but now they're doing the Microsoft renaming thing. So
yeah.
I'm architecting things, PowerShell mostly, admittedly.
Yes, and you're joining us from a hotel room on the ground, doing some awesome work.
Oh, I do believe it is awesome. I even shipped it today.
Oh, nice. Awesome. So when did you decide that being a PFE or a solution architect was the right type of thing for you? Because you've been doing it for quite a while. It seems like you really enjoy it. You get to be hands-on with tech a whole bunch and actually implementing this technology and stuff that you love. What's that like for you?
It's absolutely amazing. I'm an ADHD person, and doing awesome tech things, creating amazing toys, that's kind of the thing that gets my brain igniting and sparkling and gives me the energy to, do things. So this time at Microsoft, doing, high-end tech challenges at an unimaginable scale before that, that's kind of a self-sustaining reaction of ideas and doing fancy things and bragging about it. Thank you, by the way, for the opportunity. And, it's pretty amazing. The whole thing started like a bit 6.5 years now. Something about that. September 2018 was my start at Microsoft. And the way to that is quite simple. Before that, I was a freelance PowerShell consultant and, trainer. Doing my thing, picking my own interesting tech projects, or convincing customers to fund them. The only problem is being a freelancer in Germany is a lot of paperwork. And I didn't go into tech for paperwork. And Microsoft gave me a way larger playing field. So that's simply amazing right now. And you've got this feeling of impact you can produce. Like if I do a cool customer project before that, it was like, yeah, nice. And now I do a great customer project interacting with the Microsoft product group, and I'm improving the PowerShell life of every admin in the world that's using this Microsoft product. For example, in case you're ever wondering how the Microsoft Teams module allows you to connect with a certificate object rather than specifying a thumbprint from the certificate store, one of the things I managed to do in between, but just, again, something customer project is blocked by that. But it's like a continuous one interesting thing after the other, one interesting project after the other at, immense scales. I mean, just consider my smallest customer I currently have in a long-term engagement has 6 digits employee.
Some impact. That's an impact.
That's a lot of people you can help. It's a huge, interesting scope of project complexity. And it forces you to write code in a completely different manner than before. For like a 1,000 employee company, I don't have to write optimal performant code. I can be wasteful with my memory. I can accept adding arrays. I mean, imagine that, adding to arrays. You can do that and you're not getting punished for it. Or you might be using the latest 7.5 release candidate, in which case you're also not getting punished for that. teaser, it's totally worth it.
So that's really cool. The customers who you're working at, the impact that you're able to have on one engagement is more than a lot of companies will ever have in the life cycle of a company, helping out customers and stuff like that. So that's very cool. But not management, right? So I think a lot of people, when they look at a career, they see like, oh, I want to be a manager one time. They get paid the most. But you seem to have not decided that that's a good path for you, and this is sort of a better approach for you.
Andrew, you know what the acronym CIO is standing for? Career is over. Now, it's for me, it's kind of like, why the hell would I stop doing what I like doing just to get even more money? I don't really feel the difference in quality of life for. The current employment state, a skilled IT engineer is going to earn more money than they can really spend on average Joe spending habits. Like your usual everyday quality of life, it doesn't change much. If I get a 20% raise, all it really is going to change is, well, the hotel room I pick for my vacation.
Dude, you're smart. You're very good at PowerShell, and you got that wisdom too, because that's a very wise approach, man. And I think it's worth highlighting, worth mentioning to those people who are out there in their careers and they're moving. You might want to pause and think, like, what's going to actually make you happy? And if you need more money to eat, definitely do anything to get that more money. But if you're at a point where you've been doing this for a while, you've maybe gotten a few raises along the way, and you're comfortable, you have to think about it, what you're doing. What does it give back to you outside of just salary? Because it sounds like you get a whole bunch of it, a bunch out of the job from the impact that you're able to have. That's very invigorating. Especially if you feel connected to the impact of your work, it's a lot easier to pour yourself into your work and get refueled by it.
It is. It absolutely is. So that's also one of the reasons I've stuck with Microsoft, even though I had some job offers that, quite frankly, were even better paying. But it just wouldn't have kept them in our nerd fed. It would have, like, one of the things I like the most about being a kind of consultant at Microsoft. I mean, it's not the role consultant, but I go to customers, help them with their projects, with their problems, and then move on. One of the greatest thing is I'm not stuck in all the damn meetings. I've got, of course, a few meetings, like making sure I advise the customers correctly, or as to the best of my ability, at least. I mean, correct is an objective term that's kind of hard to nail down, but to the best of my ability, try to guide the project somewhere, and then I get to do the project and have the others do the meetings. And that's, well, it's kind of allowing me to cherry pick the best part of about IT that I really went into IT for. We still do have some internal meetings I could do without, yes, but the ratio is a lot better than any of my tech contacts I meet at conferences or that I work with on the job. So definitely winning out for me here.
Are there any topics or areas of IT you're excited about in 2025, maybe hoping you kind of get to encounter them a little bit, maybe want to explore them in your personal life?
Well, there's a few aspects I want to look into. First of all, of course, I mean, it's everything we're talking about at Microsoft at this time. I look at how I can make AI work better for me, because the current stage of things for AI works great for me in my office life, but does not work well for me in my coding life. And I do believe I have found some of the key problems to look at and what I want to work with. I know that Chrissy Lemaire had some interesting projects on that, on how to give AI assistants the proper context for your projects. And I'm looking into, well, iterating on some of that, how to write code that AI can better understand, and how to make that understanding of AI work better for you in the same project. Some of the aspects I already have some success with, some significant ones. For example, I've got a command that will automatically insert help for all of your commands in all of your code base. I can literally do a get child item recurse through your C scripts folder, and just have it insert anything, a comment-based help anywhere you haven't written help yet. But, well, the quality of that help actually is kind of iffy because the system currently is not yet fully project context aware. It's just kind of like, here's the code for that function. As long as that function is an isolated item, it works well. But one of the key problems with AI with PowerShell is the hallucination problem and the fact that in PowerShell it's so incredibly hard to provide good context to the AI. So, well, that's kind of what I'm looking forward to do a bit more on. There's some organizational problems involved there, which is why I'm not confident I'll be able to finish with that in this year, but it's definitely something I'll be working on. Other than that, it's, the usual framework stack thing that I'm working on, PS Framework notably, but also templating is going to get a revamp. And, well, there's this new thing I just recently released that I am going to invest a lot more into to, well, make package management work smoothly.
Oh, interesting. You mentioned PS Framework. I want to hear a quick listing of some of your top projects here for people to just be able to identify, maybe look into real quick. What are some of your most prized projects?
Most prized projects. Well, the PS Framework project in its entirety. That involves PS Framework itself, of course, as the huge scripting framework. But also very important for me is the PSModuleDevelopment part, which is my developer toolkit, and PSUtil, which is my console experience module. Added to that now, recently released in versions 0.9, PSFramework.Nuget, which is the package management component. Basically, I've got this conceptualization of how I structure and classify modules. I've got the API layer. An API layer module kind of only cares about interacting with that API, that service, that feature. Classic example for an API layer module is the Active Directory module. It doesn't solve business processes. It does not provide a direct value for a solution. All it does, it gives you a command set that maps that service you're trying to manage. That's an API layer module. On top of that, you have the process layer module. Let's say in Active Directory, there's this account called KRBTGT, which is the account domain controllers use to sign all the tickets. Hint, if your attacker owns that account, you have a problem. So one of the things you need to do as a domain admin is frequently rotate the password for that account. So that's a technical process you need to implement, and you need to implement that safely, because if you mess that up, some of your domain controllers are not going to be able to sign tickets, which means users are not going to be able to sign in to their Active Directory domain. Not as much of a problem as it used to be, but there's still plenty of companies out there that still use it, or still heavily depend on it rather than having it as a supplementary service. I mean, we are living mostly in a hybrid world right now. So I've got a module called KRBTGT, which implements that technical process using API layer modules like Active Directory or group policy. On top of that, you have business solution modules that implement a business process, like an organizational process you want to implement. That uses process layer modules to implement the actual technical steps using API layer. So you got like a hierarchical level of modules. On top of solution layer, I've got the data layer where there's no code, but the business information. And well, that's a stack where I know if I've got a large complex project, which feature of the project needs to go where. And it allows me to keep, even in the complex project, still don't lose track. Don't get confused with it, especially if I have to go back. So what the hell is this whole journey intended to point at? Well, all of these module layers need modules. And you need to have a standardized way to go about that. Don't treat your modules like pets, treat your modules like cattle. And in order for a team to be able to do that reliably, especially if you don't have only one project, but multiple projects, is you need to have a common standard of tooling, of infrastructure, of resources you can rely on. And that's the PS Framework project. It is your consistent, reliable stack of PowerShell tooling. PS Framework as the core infrastructure you take a dependency on. PSModuleDevelopment as the toolkit your developers use to have reliable templating, reliable, refactoring tools, and a lot of other developing features that are in there. And I'll admit, PSUtil, I'm kind of opinionated. It's like, it used to be my PowerShell profile, but I do claim that it makes your console experience better. So that's the one thing it's the one huge project that I'm really proud of, and it's like my magnum opus one. I've got two of them. Because the second major Fred is proud of thing is the Active Directory Management Framework. It is a toolkit that allows you to define your entire Active Directory environment in configuration, similar to how you would be doing desired state configuration, only less technical. And then you can use that configuration and test reality against it. And not just like your one environment, but if you have 100 forests, 100 Active Directory environments, you can use the same thing, do the same thing, and realize where there's configuration drift, where there's somebody did something they really should not have been doing. You might not have auditing there because it doesn't tell you who changed things, but it allows you to manage really complicated environments without having to write a single line of code yourself.
That's ADMF?
That's ADMF.1.
Awesome. Well, you are certainly, I talk about it on the podcast. Those who listen to all the episodes, they'll have heard me say similar things before. I love the community. I love the people who leave a star on a project, leave some feedback, use a project, maybe share a solution or two, run. I also love the people, though, who write modules. And there are some people in the community who are really prolific at it and do the work of 20 people or 30 people. And you are one of those people. And your collection of work is really so impressive. And those of you who are out there listening, if you haven't checked out, particularly in my opinion, I think start with PS Framework and you can kind of trickle out from there. That's my recommended path, but some very impressive stuff. And you can sort of add this to your tool chain. PSUtil, PS Framework, I think PSModuleDevelopment even. I've submitted PRs for all of those. So I do like those projects. And it's so cool to see what you've been able to create over the years. I mean, you've been working on these for as long as I've known you, pretty much, right? Pretty sure.
Well, I started before the conference time and we met at the PowerShell Summit. So, yep. It helps that I managed to convince my customers to fund development time or allow me to share things I write on customer time, which is the real reason I managed to be that prolific. Yep. Because for most people, they kind of have to do their module development for the community outside of work hour. So, of course, you're limited. You've got family. You've got, maybe you have friends. You might actually want to have some gaming night or bar night or whatever you do with your friends. And all of that is kind of detracts from your module development time. And I get to do that 30 hours a week on customer time, maybe 35. This week, it's going to be 40 hours.
Oh, that's exciting. Yeah, I think that even for people who aren't doing as extensive projects as you do have to align things. And there's a way to do it. There's a way to say like, hey, I want to adopt X product. There isn't a PowerShell module for X product. I'd like to write one so I can use it automations at work. But would it be all right if I created it as an open source project so that other people can check it out and make it better? And, maybe I'll leave this company one day and maybe someone will keep it up to date so you don't have to keep paying someone to do it. Anyways, there's a business case to be made. And if you can do that, then you are able to start building your public resume and being able to really get paid to PowerShell and keep track of it at work, which is sort of the goal for a lot of people. But you do have to sort of align things and make it make sense for your boss to get approval.
That is very much a strong recommendation. Having it on your GitHub publicly available is part of a portfolio going forward. Now, there are a few common problems with getting that started. One of them is, convincing your boss, of course. But what actually convinces your boss? How can you make that happen? Well, the first thing is licensing. Most techies don't have any idea about licenses. For example, hey, you're looking for something, you find a GitHub repository, and there's some code snippet, 200 lines of PowerShell code that solve your problem. Question, Andrew, can you just take that code and use it?
I will say no, but I'll just say it depends on the license.
Exactly. It depends on the license. Now, open source does not automatically mean free.
Correct.
And one of the things that I like about Microsoft, working at Microsoft, we have a standard process to get approval for all that. And we have a standard license we are by policy required to use. The license is called the MIT license. It's a standard license by the originally written by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And the license basically says everybody is absolutely free to use this project for whatever, but there's absolutely zero warranty and zero guarantee. It doesn't have any purpose that we promise you, and if it kills your environment, that's on you. So the key thing why I mentioned license here is the main reason the management is going to say, no, please don't publish thing, is not because that's, hey, this is valuable corporate IP that we must never, ever show anybody. No, it's because of legal risk. Because if you're not careful about the license and somebody on the internet uses this script that is owned by the company and that script does something wrong, there's a whole thing of legal stuff that can go wrong. But with an MIT license on the project, your company is totally free from that. The MIT license is known and approved pretty much worldwide as have fun, but know what you're doing. So that's the first thing that I strongly recommend mentioning, that you have this license publicly approved by pretty much everybody that guarantees that there's no legal risk coming back to the company. Second, you're posting this under your own name, and you're not mentioning the company in there. Examples of Contoso or whatever work really, really well for that. So there's not even a reputation impact if something goes wrong. Just make sure that's well established with your management, because the key thing they're going to care about is risk. Now, the next thing is, of course, you also need to show some benefit. Why would your boss benefit from this, from you doing this in open source? Because even if it's an extremely low risk, if there's no benefit, why would he be saying yes, or she, as better maybe? So the nice thing about that is, like, you can point out that other people might find bugs for you before they actually hurt your internal environment. And they might provide pull requests, as in free development time that the company doesn't have to pay for. They might also have some feature requests which provide ideas and input that might make your project more valuable internally, which you wouldn't have thought of. So there's opportunity, there's time saving, and there's reduced risk of code in your internal environment without you having to spend any extra time on no benefit, because you only have to spend time on that if that benefit actually realizes. So it's just like, tell your boss how it is not risky, and that visualize the benefit in a way that management can understand. Because if you tell them my project is going to be more awesome, well, that's nerd talk. They don't speak nerd talk.
Man, you are wise. You have to be able to understand the needs of a business and make things make sense for the business. It's great that you know how to write PowerShell, everybody out there. But if you want to actually get things done in an organization, you're going to need more skills than just that. Listen to Fred. I like that. And I'd also say, for those of you who are in orgs who are like, oh, dude, we have like just everything's on fire. Nobody cares about licenses. That's okay. Whatever. Maybe you don't need to care. Maybe you're but you should, as someone who takes ownership of their career, you should have a little bit of pride and conduct yourself in a way where, hey, maybe one day you are in a position to get a job at a place like Microsoft. And wouldn't it be really weird if you were all of a sudden having to do things the right way and the proper way? Wouldn't it be a little bit better if you were always sort of doing things appropriately? And I think that applies to pretty much everything you can do. You really need to take pride of it and try and do things the right way. It'll lead you to a better spot, and you'll learn a lot more along the way. Or you can kind of hamper your development by taking the shortcut. Anyways, I'm sorry. I'm like defending licenses over here, but MIT is pretty easy to use. And you'll find if you are creating a project and you don't put one on it, people at these more mature organizations with more mature IT teams are not going to be using your projects. And maybe they'll submit a PR to say like, hey, could you add a license? I've seen a bunch of PRs for that over the years.
Right. Oh, and if you're publishing a module on the private PS data, private data, there's a field for license URI. If you fill in the link to the license file in your GitHub, it shows up in the PowerShell gallery as a link. Like, here's the link to the license. That's really helpful for organizations with set strict license management to be able to use your project.
That is very true. Good highlight there. What do you recommend for organizations when it comes to repositories? When you get them set up with PowerShell, what are we suggesting?
As in Git repositories or PowerShell gallery kind of repositories?
PowerShell gallery kind of, basically, a lot of times on the show I've said, hey, you shouldn't rely on the PowerShell gallery or any public repository of any sort. That is just...
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Could you speak to that a little bit?
I'm very happy to. Now, fundamentally, this is, by the way, not just Fred opinion. This is also on this Microsoft security recommendations part. For your production environments, you should not be relying on public repositories. You should curate your own internal ones. And only republish public packages into those that you trust. Now, that you trust, that's an interesting kind of condition. Like, how do you establish trust? How do you express trust? That's easy. It's in the internal gallery, or it's code signed by ourselves before we push that into the internal gallery. There's different quality levels. I strongly recommend code signing, but that's a different and long story. But how do you trust a module? For example, it's signed by the publisher. If it's an official Microsoft module and you need to manage that official Microsoft service, you're basically already on board for Microsoft code, so you might as well use the officially signed module. Same for other software vendors, obviously. Another one that you could do is I read that line by line by line and then republish internally, a full code review. That is a very reliable way to establish trust, but it takes a lot of effort, of course. So it's a balancing act, like how much effort is your level of trust worth to you. You could also say, hey, this module has 10 million downloads, and this version of the module has been on the gallery for half a year. Probably that's not going to be infected. I'm willing to take that. It's a judgment call. There's no one fits all solution here. But we strongly recommend that you don't just go to the gallery. It's not just for security reasons, by the way. It's also a thing to not be suddenly ambushed by a breaking change somebody did. Having an internal repository allows you to test new versions before you inflict them on everybody. Other than that, what would I use for internal repository? There are different solutions for different scenarios, obviously. If you have you need a low infrastructure, low overhead solution that is easy to use, and you still have an on-prem Active Directory, you can simply put it in a file share. This does not scale well from a performance perspective. Because for any kind of indexing, you need to go through all of the modules in there. But if you need a quick solution to just get started, it's easy because you literally don't need anything. You can even put that into a OneDrive if you don't have an Active Directory in a team folder structure, and have everybody sync that team files to their machine, and you still have the same capability there. So there's an easy intro. It's great for people that have a low tolerance for complexity.
Yeah.
So
I think people out there, if you're like a 1 to 2 person IT team, maybe you're the only one writing PowerShell, you should still try and follow best practice as much as you can. And maybe this is just a solution that kind of works for you.
It solves a lot of problems and enables a lot of the late game tool building chain for teams. Because if you're a small shop, you're doing some scripting here and there, at some point you get into the script version hell, where we only have script files, and somebody actually updating the version number on that script file is kind of, hopefully they remember kind of thing. So you've got 10 changes to the script and 3 separate version numbers only. Happens, and 3 is actually already generous. And having an internal gallery, even if it's only a file share, forces you to have proper version management, because the moment you have a package management, no matter how complex, you can no longer have 2 different versions of a module under the same version number. Also, it incentivizes you to take dependencies, because suddenly you don't have to have complex installation guidance. It's just like, here's our one internal module. Like, you've got this Contoso Tools module, which has all of our company functions that we keep using, like some company-specific logging, some other parts. And if you need some other cool community module, just take a dependency on that. And your coworker, who's even less PowerShell fine, you just tell them, like, do this one line and you've got it. Of course, there's some problems with that. It doesn't scale well. If the team is larger, that's a problem. If you're not just a team, but an entire organization, what then? If you don't have a file share everybody can access, but you are in a well-distributed cloud-first scenario, we might not even have an Active Directory anymore. File sharing is becoming difficult, but you've got this thing called Entra ID. There are separate options there. You can have a NuGet server of some kind. This could be an official Microsoft one, which I am absolutely not brainwashed to tell everybody about. Azure DevOps Artifacts. Or you could have some other NuGet server. It's a standard. There are different source control systems that offer that. Pretty much all of the larger source control services, from GitLab to GitHub Enterprise to Artifactory to whatever, have some NuGet service that you can use as a PowerShell gallery. If it speaks NuGet, it speaks PowerShell. There is also another really fancy thing you could be doing, which is actually pretty awesome. I just tested this today, matter of fact. In the latest version, a preview version of PSResource.Get, the successor to PowerShell Get, they added support to having PowerShell galleries in Azure Container Registries, which is a standalone resource on Azure, which organizationally is often a lot easier to bootstrap than having an Azure DevOps Services artifact stream, which is a compliance thing, which has lots more authentication hiccups. With the ACR, Azure Container Registry, you do a connect AC account, and if your user is authorized to access that, that's it, you're in. You can install install PS resource. Or, as the matter may be, install PSF module, which is that latest tool coming up.
Awesome. So we'll get to those tools in just a little bit here, but I want to highlight something you said, because you said if you take a module as a dependency, like we'll say PSFramework, someone checks out PSFramework, they say, oh, wow, this handles a lot of problems I'm having, logging, and so on, and I want to take this on as a dependency. And they, I guess, they'll internalize PSFramework, and obviously they'll internalize their own module that they're publishing. And then whenever they tell their coworker, hey, just download, like you said, I think Contoso tools, which is the module that they would have written, they go to install just that one. Because there's a dependency and it's registered in the same repository, it will just automatically download PSFramework, right?
Yep.
So pretty seamless,
all the other
experience. Perfect.
It's the internal repositories, or repositories in general. It's just usually that the internal ones enable the business processes. They basically make taking dependencies practical. Yes. Otherwise it's kind of the game for the nerds, because we understand what we need to install our machine to get everything enabled. But having an internal repository and the dependencies thing, that allows you to really lower the entry barrier and make it accessible to everybody.
And there's a step you talked about that I want to highlight, and that's the internalizing part. That is when you make sure that there's no security flaws.
Ideally, or at least that you have sufficient amounts of trust in what you're publishing or republishing, actually.
Yeah, but that's when it goes through the sort of trust process in order to go from external to internal.
Yep.
And whatever your organization decides and whatever risk they want to take on during that process, that's going to be up to them. But yeah, that's some pretty impactful stuff there. I think there's a lot of people who maybe haven't gotten started with that. A lot of people have been using repos for a while and they're very comfortable with it. What's the difference between a repository like that and a GitHub repository?
Yeah, that's a major point of confusion.
Yeah.
Well, the GitHub repository or Git repository, GitHub is a service speaking that protocol. Other solutions like GitLab or Azure DevOps or similar solutions speak the same language. GitHub is just the public face, the public service that most people know about. That's the point of those services is like, here's my source control. This is the script files that I want to publish as a module in the form that I want to write them at. not optimized for usage. There might be differences in PowerShell, for example. Having all of your module in a single file is great for performance when you're trying to use it in the field. Having a single 20,000 lines of code script file to write and make changes in is not a good experience. So in source control in your GitHub, you have your source code in the form that you want to edit it and work with it, like expand upon it. And what the absolutely key benefit of source control like GitHub is, it gives you a full history. It gives you the certainty that you and your coworker are not going to accidentally overwrite each other's files. There's a conflict handling, not like just the last person who saved the file wins. It's a collaboration platform amongst team members, or it's your personal memory in case you actually want to go back to that version of that script you had 4 years ago, because actually the change you did back then turns out to have had side effect after this last service updates that you like kind of want to peek like, why did I change it? What was it before that? You can always go back. You don't have to leave like script with 75% commented out code just in case at some point in the far future you still need it. Which, oh my God, makes it unreadable. So GitHub and Co, they are kind of for storing your code in the form that you write it and that you want to cooperate with others upon. It has lots of tooling improvements that we cannot possibly properly do justice here without confusing the hell out of people. So I'm going to stop there. PowerShell Gallery, the public service, or internal PowerShell repositories, where we distribute PowerShell modules. They're not for having your source code in your edit format. You can't just edify it. Think of it like it's a huge folder with zip files in there. And your install module, it picks the correct version of those zip files and downloads it and unwraps it. So this is like just a big distribution endpoint for zip files. I know I'm oversimplifying here, but that's pretty much the difference.
No, so it's basically, okay, if you're developing, you're writing a script, you're going to want to use something like a GitHub repository, maybe some GitLab, something like that. If you have completed modules and you're distributing them in a company, you would use something like a PowerShell repository or a NuGet kind of thing.
Yep.
Okay. Both are kind of important if you're trying to do things best practice.
You definitely want to have both.
Yeah. I think that if you don't have both, definitely want to explore that. And those are some helpful skills in this current era, because I think more and more orgs are starting to definitely have both. And the assumption is you're very comfortable, at least working with repositories in general.
Yeah. So that's kind of important, like really, really important if you want to up your PowerShell game. But there's just one stumbling block that I've been frustrated with, that many people have been frustrated with, and that has made it quite hard to really get started with that. And that is, I kind of owe the PowerShell team here an apology here, because there's a complex story and I can understand how things happen there, but the state of PowerShell get. Basically, the state of install module and co, and the tools that you use to actually receive those modules, to deploy those modules, they started as a great thing for those few nerds that would be interested. We literally didn't have an idea how that would blow up, how the sheer adoption spread out would change the game where the tools would be using faster and harder than we could respond to, especially with the dependency problem about package management and other reasons that kind of blocked things. So what's the current status? You've got an offline environment server, and you can't use install module until you have bootstrapped it using an internet link. Remember, this is an offline server. It doesn't get into the internet. It just doesn't do internet. It's offline. So how are you going to use install module? Well, you could use the latest version of PowerShell package management, which doesn't have that problem. But how are you going to deploy this new module into an environment where module installation doesn't work? Well, of course, there are workarounds for that. You could just copy it over. You could have some logon script or system start script by group policy that bootstraps that from a share and all that. But that's all fiddly things people have to do if they can manage it. If they don't mess it up, it's fragile. It's a bit of a problem. Then there's the latest version of PowerShell 7, which has the successor with install PS resource rather than install module, which works a lot better. Quite frankly, it's magic superpower of comfort compared to the old version. And it comes out of the box, like out of the PowerShell 7 box. Now we have the story about organizations saying we can't install PowerShell 7 because we don't have an application owner. I mean, technically, it's not a problem. Update management for Microsoft or Windows Update, security policy, same thing as Windows PowerShell. Deployment, it's an MSI file, just deploy it for your application management you already have. So it's never really been a technical challenge, but an organizational. Getting people to actually, well, say, okay, as an organization, we can do that, because in many cases, they say, this is an application, it needs an application owner. Now, which single individual contributor, engineer, admin is going to willingly raise the hand and says, yes, I'm willing to take full responsibility over PowerShell 7 for the entire company? Well, surprisingly, very few do. So we have the next blocker here, of which we can't really solve because PowerShell 7 now, well, we can't just deploy that organizationally. So it's a bit of an issue here. Then, well, and a few other problems that just lead to that PowerShell module thing works really well on the local admin workstation that has internet and an admin who knows how to handle PowerShell modules and repositories. And that's been a bit of a problem. So I had this other requirement that I needed to interact with PowerShell repositories for. And well, I was now starting to write something that had to deal with this whole nightmare, which meant I had to deal with this whole nightmare thing. And I decided, well, you know, Fred, while you're already doing this thing, why not just fix the problem? I mean, it can't be that hard, can it? Famous not quite last words, as it turns out. So the original timestamp says 2023. The current release timestamp says 2025. In the meantime, this project has been sometimes very active, sometimes on the back burner, and this Christmas break, I finally managed to wrap it up. PSFramework.Nuget, which wraps the whole PowerShell module thing and gives install module the parameter -computer name. So I can now use PowerShell remoting to install onto the target server, even though only my local admin box has been fully configured for PowerShell package management.
Nice.
It also has the ability to, you know, install PS resource get, the latest version onto machines, or the latest version of PowerShell get if you're still stuck with the V2 versions. So it can also fix that whole chicken egg problem about the target server being able to run install module. And of course, you can give it a list of, well, 50,000 servers, and it's going to do that in parallel. Not all 50,000 at the same time, but it's not going to wait for the first one to complete to continue on with the next.
Nice. So you've been busy.
Oh,
that's fair to say. And I think you got more to talk about, isn't that right?
Oh, I can talk a lot more about that. Do you want me to continue on with just more features, or do you want me to show you something?
You know what, Fred? I think we have a lot more to talk about, but I want to cut things a little bit short here and save it for part 2. So, Fred, leave the people out there with one final message.
With one final message: build modules, distribute them, and win. Don't do that and suffer your own ignorance. I know that's a bit aggressive, but you totally want to have that ease in your life of having a proper package management. Start small if you are still struggling with that. And you know what? There's this PowerShell Discord. You can find lots of helpful people, myself included, that are willing to help if you're blocked on that. It saves you so much time around over the years, and it enables you to upgrade your PowerShell game, because a lot of the recommendations from the community kind of feel bothersome before you can try them out, and you can't try them out without package management.
Yeah. And I'll give a shout out. That's aka.ms/PS Discord. That is the PowerShell community Discord. And want to give another shout out to PowerShell Wednesdays. That's every single Wednesday at, I think, 2 p.m. EST. we're going to stick with that for now. And in the past, tomorrow in my life, Fred will be joining us, and there'll be a lot more awesome guests and content then. That is a 30-minute lunchtime meetup. Fred, thank you for joining us. We will be back
Thank you
next week for another, maybe we'll get a little hands-on. Fred, can you give us a little demo? Can we see some stuff?
Right now or then?
Next week. I mean,
totally,
in our time, we got two different realities going on here.
I'm absolutely always happy to brag about my toys and showcase them. Don't you worry about that.
Awesome.
I do have some fancy stuff happening.
Well, thank you, everybody out there. Thank you, Fred, for joining. It's always great catching up with you. If you're walking, if you're running, if you're going to work, if you're going home, just be safe and keep PowerShelling. And you know what? While you're at it, get some more coworkers into PowerShell. Share it with your buddy who's also into IT and trying to up their level. Give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast platform of choice. Fred, just like PowerShell, this podcast is all over the world. And we appreciate everyone who shows support and shares it with their friends. And Fred, we'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the PowerShell Podcast. The PowerShell Podcast is a PDQ production, making device management simple, secure, and pretty damn quick.